that we encourage them to pay their staff better, be able to recruit more people, and be able to collect more money from taxpayers. There are very many people in this country who do not pay taxes, Honorable Speaker. But what we are confronted with today is a regime that is more intent on killing business, Honorable Speaker, than encouraging taxpayers. Today, Honorable Speaker, if you go to Naivasha, a thriving business that was being run by the lady called Tabitha Karanja, simply because Keroche Brewery is, Honorable Speaker, simply because and out of her political affiliation, Honorable Speaker, that factory today is closed down, rendering close to 3,000 people, taxpayers, jobless, Honorable Speaker. You go to Thika, Honorable Speaker, the factory that was run by Humphrey Kariuki, that employed close to 5,000 people, has been shut down. Honorable Speaker, I want to say as I conclude, because I see time is over, that we must empower KRA to collect more revenue. We must rebuild our economy from the bottom up, and I rise to vehemently, Mr. Speaker, oppose the increment or the variation of this public debt ceiling, because it will be a further burden to the Kenyan people, Honorable Speaker, and I beg to oppose.
Honorable Wandai.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for this opportunity to comment on this very important subject that is before us, the subject of public debt. And Mr. Speaker, before I proceed, I really wonder why Honorable Chungwa is so emotional. You know, unlike him, I want to refuse to be emotional, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, or perhaps when yes. Mr. Speaker, let me proceed and protect me from the honorable buyer. Mr. Speaker, you know, I have the advantage of having been the chair of the Public Accounts Committee. And this is a matter we have pronounced ourselves on. Last time in our last report that we tabled here was adopted last week, I think, the 2018-2019 report. I've got two issues, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, is the matter of the record itself of the public debt. This is an issue that we keep to haggle around. And we recommended, Mr. Speaker, if I may just remind the House, in our report, that we needed to have Section 64, subsection 2 of the PFM Act amended to make it obligatory for the National Treasury to prepare, publish, and publicize an up-to-date national debt register every quarter of the financial year. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have heard stories, really, and conflicting stories for that matter, of how much, in essence, this public debt is at any given moment. That is an issue that needs to be addressed once and for all. Second, Mr. Speaker, is the matter of the borrowing. We have proposed as a committee, and of course because of the process of processing bills, that amendment has not come to pass, even as we prepare to adjourn. Mr. Speaker, we had proposed an amendment to Section 50 of the PFM Act to make it mandatory for the executive or the National Treasury, for that matter, to come before this House anytime they want to commit the country to a debt burden of 1 billion shillings and above, so that this House gives the final seal of approval for any debt agreement that is entered into between the Kenyan government and the donors or the lenders, so to speak. We hope that in the fullness of time, even for those of us who might be lucky to come back in the next parliament, that this amendment will go through, so that we don't leave this matter of committing the public to borrowing in the hands of the executive or the National Treasury exclusively. That this House should play an oversight role right from the outset. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with the Honorable Chungwa on one account. that debt per se is not a bad thing. And that has been elaborated at length, even by the leader of majority a while ago. The most important thing is, to what use? To what use do we put debt, so to speak? To what use do we put debt? There are conflicting schools of thought as to whether the money we have continued to borrow in this country has been put to good use or not. And that's a debate again which can go on forever. But the most important thing at this defining moment, Mr. Speaker, is that we must prepare ground for the next administration to be able to transact the business of governance without any hindrance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and therefore, in my view, I see a situation where we are in a catch-22 kind of situation. We are damned if we do, we are damned if we don't. Because the next administration would have to get fiscal space, would need fiscal space to be able to transact business of governance in terms of providing essential services, indeed all services to the public, and to be able to meet the obligations. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, in as much as it is fashionable and indeed populist to be tempted to oppose this proposal, I refuse to go that direction. I refuse to go that direction in the sense that as a responsible house, even as we want to seek answers as to where public debt has been put to in the past, we must be responsible enough to be able to allow the next administration to operate effectively. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I will be supporting this motion, but on condition, Mr. Speaker, that the administration that is going to come, Mr. Speaker, is able to demonstrate that it is going to be using this debt in a responsible manner, in a manner that is going to bring value, going to add value to the public, Mr. Speaker. And that is the most important thing. Rather than to sit back and say now, because perhaps in the past this money has been misused, let's now refuse to allow this borrowing to continue and therefore put the next administration into serious jeopardy. That will not be responsible of us. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, let us approve this motion as we caution the present administration and the incoming one that it must utilize public debt in a responsible manner, Mr. Speaker, that adds value to the Kenyan people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
You see, I'm surprised at the tail end of the 12th Parliament, the member for Kitutu Church North doesn't. I thought we went electronic. You don't just put it there. You also press. But also just to inform the Honorable Jimmy Angwenyi that the standing orders which you've just approved have actually established a committee of this House to deal exclusively with the matter of national debt and privatization. So those of you who are coming to the Parliament, look forward to that very active committee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I hope I'm a member of that committee. Anyway, be it as it may.
Somebody suggests that you should be retiring. That's why the member for Endebase is suggesting.
Semeji.
But I need to inform the member for Endebase that the Honorable Jimmy Angwenyi, the indomitable lifelong member for Kitutu Church North, has no intentions of retiring. Proceed, Honorable Angwenyi.
Okay. I'm very young, the way he says. Go to my systems work, all the systems. That's where you determine whether you are lost or not. Now, Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion.
And I would like to, where is Ichungwa? I would like to tell him, to educate him where he did not, maybe not learn, that some of the countries which have moved from third world, first world, and I can mention 3, even 4, have had to use debt to develop and move from third world, first world. One of them is Hong Kong. The other one is Singapore. The other one is South Korea, which borrowed money from Kenya 1971. And the fourth one is China. China, in the last 30 years, because of using money which is borrowed, has developed to be the second largest economy in the world. And we want to be the first, the highest economy in Africa. To do that, we need to borrow money, we need to invest, so long as we apply it in proper investments. Like the one which has been, which was launched yesterday, whereby we insist on manufacturing. Mr. Speaker, a few years ago, I attended a World Trade Organization meeting in Hong Kong. And in the morning, when I went for breakfast, I could see a lot of people. But between morning and 6 o'clock, between 8 and 6 o'clock in the evening, you don't see anybody even on the road. And I asked our consular, what's happening? Where these people go? And he told me, let me take you around. He took me to a place, a factory which was manufacturing candles. And he said, this is a factory manufacturing candles and has got employees, 2,000 employees. And there's an order from Kenya of 30 million shillings for candles, which you can manufacture in Kenya. And he told me, these candles are manufactured out of crude oil, which you get from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is closer to Kenya than it's to Hong Kong. And he took me to another place where they're manufacturing clothes. And he told me this factory has got 5,000 workers. And there's an order from Kenya of 50 million shillings for clothes. And they said, this factory has got an order of that much. But also, that part of that order is for mitumba. The clothes which have been used, which this factory buys, then it sells to Kenya. And they said that manufacturing factory of clothing gets their cotton from West Africa, from Senegal. And Senegal is closer to Kenya than it is to Hong Kong. So what I'm saying is that if you can spend that money well, spend it in manufacturing, spend it, Yeah, there's somebody is disturbing me from there. I'm saying the debt appropriately. If this House can insist that whatever we are seeking in debt must be applied to specific projects. If it's manufacturing, specific manufacturing, then this country will move to the first world instead of being third world. Those few remarks.
The last past few days we have been registering.
I was going to close, but I cannot close after his interjection. When we raised the money from 6 billion to 9 billion, he was the chairman of budget. And him and my chair of Honorable Limo, a very nice man, and they were chairing. It was rigged out, I understand, but which is very bad. Now, Ichungwa was the one spearheading the increase from 6 billion to 6 trillion to 9 trillion. Now he's opposing only 1 trillion. I can't understand that. With those few remarks, I beg support.
Well. Let me hear the member for Alego Usonga.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to make a contribution on this motion, the variation of public debt ceiling. Honorable Speaker, I rise to support this motion, but even as I do this, I'm cognizant of the fact that there are many questions on how we procure and utilize our public debt. But Honorable Speaker, I support this motion because recently I raised a question with Treasury on how much money or what percentage of public debt has been spent in my constituency for the last 10 years. And Honorable Speaker, the answer I got was that the government has spent about 150 million Kenya shillings in constructing an administration block at SIA Institute of Technology, which is domiciled in my constituency. And I asked myself, Honorable Speaker, if the public debt is 9 trillion, and my constituency, which consists of about 400,000 people, have only benefited 150 million Kenya shillings, yet the debt is around 9 trillion. It means, therefore, that I need to fight for my people to benefit from this debt. Therefore, I want this debt to be increased, and when it is increased, about 500 billion must be spent in my constituency for my people. Because we cannot complain about public debt when my people have not seen the benefit of public debt. So, Honorable Speaker, what I want to say is that we are going to borrow more and more until my people benefit from public debt. The public debt is not as high as possible. We cannot say the public debt is high until my people benefit from it. So I want to urge Honorable Chungwa that if you think public debt is high, it is high in your constituency, not in my constituency. Honorable Speaker, let us support this motion because the incoming government will need resources to be able to run the government. But Honorable Speaker, more importantly, let me say that I think this parliament is failing. The way we audit or monitor budget is not the way it should happen, because I think the budget is being run through executive fiat. And if this House is going to be very serious, then we could find a way of monitoring the budget and ensuring that whatever we budget for is spent appropriately. And I want to urge the House that in future, let us reject this issue of Article 223 being used to spend money outside the budget. It's not right. But for now, let us support this motion. I support it. And I want to urge the incoming President, Raila Amolo Odinga, to ensure that this part of this debt is used in Alego Usonga. Thank you.
Honorable Atandi, you are aware that the control of budget makes quarterly reports on budget implementation. And those reports are always tabled here. Some of those documents that have always been tabled here by the leader of majority, but I've always said, departmental committees, please look at those reports, because you will be able to monitor and raise the red flag at the appropriate time. So even as you say this towards the tail end of the 12th Parliament, you are now saying that you have failed, because the reports from the control budget are there, and they indicate how the budget is being implemented. And that's why they are brought here. This is a constitutional obligation on the office holder to table those reports. And whenever they are brought here, they are tabled. But I've noticed that many committees, either because of work and perhaps now that we have just approved the new standing orders, you needed to maybe set up another committee for budget implementation monitoring. But I think it would be better if departmental committees regularly looked at those reports and called those people to come and explain what it is that they are doing with the monies that you have appropriated to them. Member for Endebess.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, listening to my friend Honorable Atandi, I thought he was an accountant, but he's just spoken like a layman. is an economist. Okay. Then, Honorable Speaker, having listened to the majority leader, also the old man of the house, there are things that don't make logics. Because as much as you are trying to say to justify borrowing, you should be able to borrow when you can be able to repay. If you are not able to repay, then you will cause some distress to yourself and to also those you are borrowing on behalf. And I think by raising this ceiling to 10, we are causing more distress to the Kenyans, to the Mwananchi, because what it means is that it will create a lot of, there must be some bit of taxation, increase in taxation for these people to be able to meet those obligations and for the country to be able to even repay for that debt. So, Honorable Speaker, I don't support this variation to 10 trillion because when you look at it, in 2005, our debt stood at 700 billion. Today, 2021, 2022, we are talking of around a debt of close to 8 trillion, which is many times more than what we inherited at 2005. And therefore, are we really borrowing responsibly? Because I don't think anybody, Honorable Kimunya tried to explain himself so hard that I think he was straining even to understand what he was saying. Because when you want to borrow, when you want to borrow, let's say from a bank or from any institution, you should have the capacity to repay. You are not just borrowing, because he gave an example that you are borrowing for mortgage. When you even borrow for mortgage, it will be cheaper if you get the money and use that labor to build the house for yourself. But if you are going to borrow for mortgage to buy the house, and then you are left with some money that you want to buy a car, and you don't have the capacity to repay for that, then it is distress. You are causing problems to yourself. Where are you going to raise the money to repay that mortgage? So, Honorable Speaker, I think looking at even the programs that people are coming up with, look at our presidential candidates. One of them said that you will be paying people 6,000 every month. When you borrow to pay people 6,000 every month, how will you be able to repay that money? Because you are giving people 6,000 for consumption. It's not capital. It's not a capital investment. You know some people are shouting, but you're shouting for the sake of shouting because even your constituents are looking at you and wondering, you are going to borrow 6,000, give somebody 6,000 so that this person can consume. How does that come into you to be able to repay for that money? And you are panning Mutumba. Huh? The same Mutumba which would have costed that person even 6,000, you are now saying you don't want that Mutumba. So, Honorable Speaker, I think some of these issues that we are trying to put up in terms of raising this variation, firing the debt ceiling from 9 to 10 trillion, I think it should not happen because we are going to put Kenyans into a more hardships. We are going to create more problems, and considering the environment in which we are in, that some of even the companies, I heard yesterday one of the companies manufacturing, I think some cooking oil called cooking fry, is even closing down because of some challenges. So I think because of state capture, yes. And those are the kinds of things you have resources being captured by a few people so that the rest can trickle down, and then instead of widening the base for taxation so that everybody can feel good. With those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I want to oppose.
Member for Gitui Rural.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I rise to support this motion to vary the public debt from 9 trillion to 10 trillion. Mr. Speaker, debt is not a bad thing, so long as it is utilized in productive sectors with high socio-economic impacts. Because debt, well utilized, it will increase the economic growth, it will increase incomes, and reduce poverty. Secondly, the country should be able to service the debt. If the country is not able to service the debt, then there's no need of taking a debt. Mr. Speaker, 2021, the World Bank did a study on state of world debt. And this study shows that all the developed countries, they have over 100% debt to GDP ratio. Example, Japan. Japan, their debt to GDP ratio is 257%. Now they are surviving. Sudan, which is our neighbor here, they are at 210% of GDP. Greece, they are at 207%. Although sometimes they faced challenges in servicing their loans. US, which is a superpower, they are at 133% of debt to GDP ratio. Kenya here, we are at 70%, and we are complaining. I don't think we should be complaining. We should be saying we should even be increasing our debt, but make sure the debt is utilized well. Mr. Speaker, this country, as we speak now, the budget we are trying to face is facing a financial gap, which we have to finance. And each one of us here has a project in his constituency or in his county which need to be financed. And I'll tell you, the money we are collecting in tax revenue is only doing two things. One, service the debt, which is around 900 billion. Two, paying recurrent expenditures, which are around 700 billion. And therefore, we need to borrow to finance our budget. But Speaker, the administration which is coming in need to do several things so that at least we reduce our debt. The first thing is we need to live within our means. If we live within our means, then we may not require to borrow. Second thing, we need to modernize our tax collection system and expand our tax base. Mr. Speaker, three sectors, manufacturing, ICT and communication, finance and insurance, which contribute only 17% of GDP, contribute 53% of tax revenue. And therefore, these sectors are being overtaxed. Therefore, the country needs to look at other sectors, to bring other sectors in tax brackets so that at least these sectors are not overtaxed. And I was looking at the excise tax on beer and spirits.
Other members, who is this with who is this? Surely. Proceed, Honorable
Yes.
Mwalika.
So, actually, I was looking at tax level, excise tax generated from beer and spirits. It is actually going down. And this one confirms what we call lava cap. Lava cap is a cap which shows that at one point, there is a limit at which, if you increase tax, the tax levy started going down. So we need really to look at other sectors, increase our tax base, and raise revenue. In any case, if you reduce revenue, people are going to have high disposable income. When they are going to have disposable income, they are going to consume. When they are consuming, they are paying pay-as-you-earn tax, and the revenue will increase. Mr. Speaker, the country needs to move to borrow more concessional loans, which are cheaper, and retire the commercial loans, which are very expensive and strangling this economy. Mr. Speaker, we also need to pursue fiscal consolidation, reduce wastage in the public sector, and therefore we have more money to finance our budget and projects. Lastly, we need to look at the issue of corruption. A lot of money are being wasted and lost in corruption. With those few remarks, I support, Mr. Speaker.
Chair of Budget.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and I rise to support this motion. But as I support Honorable Speaker, I want to thank you, Honorable Speaker, on your wisdom to rearrange the order paper so that we first of all dispense off with this issue of the debt ceiling, because the budget for the 2022-2023 has a deficit of about 846 billion shillings, whereas we have a legroom of only about 200 billion shillings. So thank you, Honorable Speaker, for that. Honorable Speaker, I want to also make it very clear that the alteration of this debt ceiling is actually not affecting this financial year or affecting this government. This financial year, 2021-2022, is fully funded, including the debt that we are actually borrowing, and also including the legroom that we have. Governments operate in perpetuity. And Honorable Speaker, this one we are doing for the next government. We are doing for the budget of 2022-2023. And we are doing this as a stopgap measure, Honorable Speaker. This issue of us having a nominal figure, an absolute figure, where we say that our debt is a particular figure, Honorable Speaker, as a country, we need to have a discourse and discuss whether we need to put it as a matter of anchor figure to the GDP. Honorable Speaker, in a layman's comparison, Honorable Speaker, if you have a salary of 10,000 shillings, maybe you can borrow up to 7,000 shillings. But Honorable Speaker, if your salary increases to 20,000, you have the latitude of borrowing up to maybe 15,000 shillings. So when we grow our wealth in terms of the GDP, then it means also that we also need to have more legroom for borrowing, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, as I support Honorable Speaker, I want to point out a few issues that maybe the next administration should focus on. This current administration has, of course, focused on infrastructural development, which, of course, is, you can see them everywhere. You know, the superhighways, the express highway, the electricity connection, and all that. We need now to focus also on the software. Make sure that we have more industries, we have more people being employed, and we create more jobs for our youth, Honorable Speaker. And that's the challenge that we have for the next government. Honorable Speaker, you know, my good friend, the Chairman Emeritus, who, in a very unlikely event that his team wins, he might find himself in Treasury. If, in that unlikely event, finds himself in Treasury, without the alteration of this debt ceiling to 10 trillion, then there will be no budget. So, Honorable Speaker, this one, we are not just doing for this administration, Honorable Speaker, we are doing it for posterity, we are doing it for perpetuity, and we are doing it with an open arm, and giving the other administration time, maybe 1 year, so that now we can have one year, Honorable Speaker, so that that regime will bring a sustainable way on how we need to address our debts. Honorable Speaker, it might not be a popular decision now to say that we are altering the debts, but it is the right thing. We cannot fund the next budget if we don't alter the debt ceiling, Honorable Speaker. There are some who will be very emotional here. There are some who will say all manner of things, but the truth is, we cannot fund the next budget without altering the debt ceiling. Honorable Speaker, the prudence that we are also putting to the next cabinet secretary in the next government, Honorable Speaker, is to tell them that they have to have total disclosure. If they are borrowing for infrastructural development, it has to be specific, because sometimes they borrow for infrastructural development. However, it is put in the general budgetary support. Honorable Speaker, those are some of the things that needs to be worked on, Honorable Speaker, in the next administration. Honorable Speaker, I also want to correct what my good friend Kimani Ichung'wah said, that we are not supporting KRA. We are actually supporting KRA. And as Honorable Speaker, if he has to check, even on our estimates, you see that we have even given an extra 1 billion shillings so that we can also enhance the operations and also employ more staff. Honorable Speaker, with those very few remarks, I want to support and say that, Honorable Speaker, I beg to support. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Member for Kilifi North.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to stand here and oppose this debt ceiling review, Mr. Speaker, because those who say that removing the cap on the debt ceiling and allowing this government to continue to borrow, and we have seen here the leader of majority really struggling. For the first time, I have realized that our friend, the leader of majority, is actually not just an economist, but a pseudo-economist, because he's really struggled to explain things that really don't make sense. One of the things I want to tell him, that transparency in investment is key in debt management. If you're not transparent about the things that you're investing in, then you are not borrowing wisely. And if you're not borrowing wisely, you should not be allowed to borrow. And that is what we are saying. We should not allow you to borrow if you cannot invest transparently the money that you are borrowing. And that is one of the principles in debt management and borrowing. If you do not invest transparently, don't borrow. This country, and we know a lot of the projects that have been done, there's no transparency in them. Even the Auditor General has questioned and put gray areas in the amounts borrowed and the things that have been done from borrowing. Today, this parliament will take the debt ceiling to 10 trillion. Now, if you take it to 10 trillion, what assurances do we have that there'll be transparency in the investments that will be made out of the borrowing that you are making? Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say this, that this country has been on the penchant of supply-driven development instead of demand-driven, such that I heard the minister, the CS for infrastructure, saying, they went to China and some Chinese guys came and said, you see, we can build for you an expressway like this one. And they showed them pictures. And they called the president and said, Mr. President, there is an expressway. There's some guys here who can build an expressway. And they accepted it. Was there a demand for that expressway, or it was because there was a supply for the expressway that they accepted to do it? A lot of these projects are actually supply-driven. Chinese come here and tell ministers, we can do this for you and you'll make this much money. And people accept. And therefore, you have a road in Mombasa that is being built at, I think, 1 billion shillings a kilometer. A road that leads nowhere, 1 billion shillings per kilometer. Why? Because the Chinese came and said, we can build this road using this mechanism, and this government said, yes, that's what I'm talking about, transparency in investment of the billions that we are borrowing. We cannot continue to be supply-driven in terms of development instead of the demand-driven trajectory that is required in a developing country. So, Mr. Speaker, as we do this, I saw also that one of the presidential candidates launching his manifesto yesterday said that one of the things they will do is debt restructuring. When they come into this government, they will do debt restructuring and request World Bank to restructure the debt. What are they saying? They're saying we are in the red and we require debt restructuring. Here we are saying we cannot do the next budget in this country without borrowing. That is what they're saying. We cannot do that. But they're saying we're going to restructure debt, meaning, therefore, there's a problem. Why are we giving more? Why don't we allow the next government to come into this parliament and request for that money so that they're able to do their budget? Because they're saying we require, and everybody in this country, everybody is saying there's a problem with debt in this country. But here we are today, going on a different trajectory, saying we want to allow them to do another 10 trillion. Mr. Speaker, I want to oppose that and say that it is not healthy for this country, and this country is going the Sri Lanka way. We had the oil factory in Mombasa, in Kilifi actually. They are closing down because of lack of dollars. Dollars have been scarce in this country. What does that tell us about the economy. Where is this economy going? We are mismanaging this economy. And you see, this leader of majority was once Minister for Finance, and he did well then. But now, he's been brainwashed by this government that he cannot use that knowledge to manage this economy better than he did that time. Why? Because he cannot stand to his president and tell him, Mr. President, this is the wrong way to go. Then he could do it because it was Kibaki. Now, this president, he cannot handle him. Because he cannot handle him, he says yes to everything, including borrowing in a way that is not acceptable in this country. Mr. Speaker, I want to oppose this, and I urge the members in this to oppose this and teach these people a lesson that you cannot take this parliament for granted. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Nairobi South.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And it would be us hiding our head in the sand to say that we do not have a debt problem in this country. Mr. Speaker, truth be told, we have a big debt problem in this country, Mr. Speaker. And that is why I want to cling on a Freudian slip made by the leader of majority this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the psychologists tell us that you can sleep and say what you're thinking without wanting to say it. The leader of majority has told us that we are just about to swallow a very bitter pill. And that is the truth. It was a Freudian slip. He corrected it, but that was in his mind, and it is the truth. Mr. Speaker, this is a country that is at the height of its borrowing during COVID, was borrowing 2.5 million shillings every day, adding to the debt bill that we have in this country, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to just agree when is now the right time to stop digging the hole. Because the English tell us that when you find yourself in a hole, you have to decide to first stop digging, and then you can start climbing out of that hole, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is true what has been said. It is also true that borrowing is not the problem, Mr. Speaker. Borrowing has never been the problem, Mr. Speaker. The style with which Kenya is borrowing is the problem. The style with which Kenya is borrowing is unique. So the examples that we have been given here, Mr. Speaker, do not apply. No one borrows in the way Kenya borrows. No one utilizes borrowed money in the manner with which Kenya has been utilizing borrowed money. Mr. Speaker, I would like to, before saying why I oppose this, to first exonerate the Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Speaker. I am a member of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, Mr. Speaker, and I have friends in the delegated committee, Mr. Speaker.
What's the issue, member? What's the issue, Honorable Kizito? Member for Shinyalu, what is your problem?
Thank you, Speaker. But before I put my point of order, I wanted to first of all apologize for my phone. I left it on, and I regret for that. Thank you. Looking at the House and the matter at hand, and also just wait, and looking at how people are debating and repetition. The repetition going on, Mr. Speaker. I'm standing up on a standing order number 95 to request the mover to reply. Thank you. Will I be noted, sir?
Mr. Speaker,
okay, let the member for Nairobi South complete. It is up to you, honourable members. It's indeed it's your decision. Let him finish.
Mr. Speaker, while I agree that the member for Shinyalu has the right to call for end of debate at any point, I've got to remind him that this is probably the most important business that this House will be undertaking before we close in a die, Mr. Speaker. And the fact that even tomorrow in the headlines, you can be sure the headlines will be reading that this House has actually lifted the borrowing cap for this country to 10 million, Mr. Speaker, and unprocedurally so, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, allow me to just prosecute my points, and then we can handle the matter that has been raised by the Honorable Member for Shinyalu. Mr. Speaker, before I had ceded the floor, I was saying that before I say why I'm opposing this, I would like to exonerate the Chairman Budget Emeritus, Mr. Speaker, because a few things have been said here which are not true, Mr. Speaker. It could not be further from the truth that the chairman was a party to raising the debt ceiling to 9 trillion, Mr. Speaker. I do remember very well, I, as a member of the Justice Legal Affairs Committee, had a consultation with friends who are from the delegated committee. And I remember at the point when we were talking about raising the debt ceiling, the chair emeritus budget actually spoke at a tripartite meeting of the Finance Committee, the Delegated Committee, and the Budget Committee, where he was saying that this decision cannot be a unilateral decision by one committee. And he was actually even proposing that if we have to raise the debt ceiling, we can only raise it to around 7.5 million Kenya shillings. But Mr. Speaker, that was not the issue. The issue is that we keep digging ourselves deeper into a hole. We were here when we were debating the budget policy statement. And I was among the people who rose here and said that the deficit margin that we have been left with is only 426 million Kenya shillings. At that point, they were seeking to do an amendment to raise it to 800 billion Kenya shillings. Mr. Speaker, at that point, if we had made the right decision, we would not be finding ourselves in the problem that we find ourselves of not being able to finance the budget this year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I did listen very carefully to the leader of majority, and he was saying that he has some lessons that he can give us, in our free time. And I do pray, Mr. Speaker, that some of these lessons that the leader of majority would give this House is how the Kibaki government was able to fully finance its budget without having to unnecessarily borrow. Because, Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is that when we borrow, we are not getting free money. Mr. Speaker, when we borrow, we are actually borrowing from the future. When we steal borrowed money, we are actually stealing from the future. Mr. Speaker, the monies that we have been borrowing, that we cannot account for, getting into contracts that we cannot make public, contracts that this House has been asking for to be presented into this House, so that this House is able to interrogate them, even as we are going into the budget cycle. If we knew what we owe and what the terms are with the SGR contract, if we knew what we borrowed for the expressway and what the terms of that contract are, this House would be better informed to be making these decisions, because this is the budget-making House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the cycle of debt is such that debt with given at a time of boom can actually push an economy, Mr. Speaker. But what normally happens is that a country can get excited with borrowing, especially if they are able to borrow easily. Now, what happens is that this boom ends up being a heavy yoke on the neck of that country, and that is where we are headed, Mr. Speaker, because we were borrowing prudently in the Kibaki government. We had a semblance of sensible borrowing in the first term of Jubilee government, but by the time we were getting to the second term of the Jubilee government, our borrowing had actually gone haywire, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, these monies that we are borrowing in such a manner is actually a debt that we are putting on the future of this country, Mr. Speaker, because a boom, the cycles have proved, economic cycles have proved that any economic boom driven by debt is normally followed by a very major slump, Mr. Speaker. And the slump here is going to be informed by many issues, some of which are beyond this country's ability. We have an economic downturn globally, Mr. Speaker. We have the effects of COVID, Mr. Speaker. Now, if this slump finds us in a big debt problem, actually we'll end up shutting down this country and, in fact, mortgaging it to our lenders, who will now be demanding for money that we do not have, because our budget cannot even finance the repayments of the loans that we have borrowed so far, Mr. Speaker. So if our budget cannot finance what we have borrowed, Mr. Speaker, we are now borrowing to pay the people who we had borrowed from earlier. So borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, which now ends up giving us a problem even when we come to our development budget, Mr. Speaker, because if we are repaying debts to the tune of over 1 trillion Kenya shillings, Mr. Speaker, then where do we find money to now go into development? But, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say that finally, when we were talking about the medium-term debt strategy, this issue did come up. So, Mr. Speaker, today we cannot afford to push the can further down the road. Let us say no to the increase of the debt ceiling, Mr. Speaker. Let us stop digging the hole. Let us start climbing up from the hole that we have, so that, Mr. Speaker, we can only consume that which we have in terms of our resources, and we stop consuming that which we have not made, thinking that it is free money being given to us, while we know it is not a grant, it is actually a loan that we have to pay. And if Kenya did not borrow even an extra shilling today, we would pay the debts we have up to the year 2099, meaning that generations after us will have to pay dearly for the mistakes that we might end up making today. Mr. Speaker, I oppose vehemently to the rising of the debt ceiling in this country. Mr. Speaker,
Sorry, be looking at the light here. The yellow one tells you you have 60 seconds. The red one tells you you have 30 seconds. So you organize your contribution that way. Now, the member for Shinyalu did rise in his place and claimed that the mover be called upon to reply. Let me put that to UP members to make that decision. So I put the question that the mover be called upon to reply. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as the contrary opinion say nay? Nay. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mover.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, this is a very important motion, and I'm very happy that members have been able to ventilate and put on record some of the sentiments which no doubt the administration to come will follow. Honorable Speaker, I think for the record, it's important to internalize one thing, that because I think there's an issue that has been raised, and I would want to just have that, and I'll have replied. Transparency on debt. This year, we have a budget deficit of 846 billion, which is part of budget support. If you move back 10 years, times 10 is about 8 trillion that has gone towards budget support. But that is for the Public Accounts Committee to interrogate for us. But I want to assure you that what we are doing is a stopgap measure, like I said. It's important for purposes of moving forward, and I believe this House will facilitate the next administration coming in on the 9th of August 2022, whoever that will be, to be able to take over an economy, and then they sort out the rest themselves. I beg to reply.
Honourable members, from the clerks department, the House still has the requisite quorum. I therefore put the question that pursuant to the provisions of Section 50, subsection 2 of the Public Finance Management Act of 2012, this House approves the Public Finance Management (National Government) Amendment Regulations of 2022, published as legal notice number 89 on 26th of May 2022, thus approving the amendment made to the Public Finance Management National Government Regulations of 2015, being the principal regulations, in Regulation 26, Subregulation 1, by deleting paragraph C and substituting therefore the following new paragraph C, in brackets. Pursuant to the provisions of Section 50, subsection 2 of the Act, the public debt shall not exceed 10 trillion shillings, close the quotes. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as the contrary opinion say nay? Nay. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Go to the, now go back to order number. Huh? 14, order number 14.
Order number 14, the Appropriation Bill, National Assembly Bill number 31 of 2022, second reading.
Chairman of Budget and Appropriations Committee.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And again, Honorable Speaker, I want to really thank you for your wisdom in, first of all, dispensing off with the issue of the debt ceiling, so that all the issues now we will be discussing in the budget that we'll be discussing, of course, Honorable Speaker, it will be within the set debt ceiling. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that the Appropriations Bill number National Assembly number 31 of 2022 be read a second time. Honorable Speaker, this is an issue that we have actually dealt with, Honorable Speaker, when I brought the motion on the budget, Honorable Speaker, and we discussed at length the figures and the issue, all the issues that were captured, Honorable Speaker, in the budget estimates for the financial year 2022-2023 that was submitted to this House on the 7th April in adherence to the requirements of Article 221 of the Constitution. Honorable Speaker, the revenue and expenditure proposals are coming during a transition period, Honorable Speaker, where a big shift is expected in policy, goals, and programs of the government. Honorable Speaker, it is worth noting that the policies mentioned or outlined in this budget are still anchored on the medium-term 3, which is coming to an end in June this year. Further, Honorable Speaker, the government is still prioritizing on the big 4, and of course, highlighting especially the universal health care, which we are hoping that the subsequent governments will be able to build on. Honorable Speaker, my critical review of the budget reviews that the country is still struggling economically. We are still facing the shocks from the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Honorable Speaker, the growth worldwide in economy is also not promising, Honorable Speaker. While the domestic economy performance was better that last year at a rate of 7.5%, but we are still faced with uncertainties. Honorable Speaker, we continue to receive unfavorable weather conditions, and most parts of the country are affected by low crop production. I also wish to draw the attention of this House to some of the issues that may have adverse effects to our economy. Honorable Speaker, the fiscal fronts shows that there is a good performance in the current financial year, Honorable Speaker. Most of the revenues have performed above the targets, Honorable Speaker. The third quarter of the financial year 2021-2022. I also want to associate this with the primary intervention by the government, which the government undertook to ease up the COVID-19 related restrictions, which eventually led to the recovery of economic sectors. The total projected revenue, Honorable Speaker, is Kenya shilling 2,480 billion, which is 17% of GDP, which is properly in an appealing projection, given that there are no specific proposals aimed at enhancing revenue collection. The medium-term revenue targets are unlikely to be achieved, considering, Honorable Speaker, that this is an election year. Honorable Speaker, the finance bill tabled in this House, proposing amendments to the various statutory taxes to raise an extra 50 billion, of course, was not realistic, and some of them were rejected by this House. Most of the proposals were touching on basic consumer goods, which is a direct or which directly affects the common mwananchi. And that is the reason Parliament, in its wisdom, some of those recommendations were actually rejected, Honorable Speaker. As a country, we need to come up with a reliable and effective mechanism of raising revenue. Further, there is a worrying trend in the projected ministerial appropriations in aid. Statistics show that there is a significant drop over years of a targeted appropriation in aid compared to the actuals. Most of these missed targets as a result of fees charged by public universities. Our public universities are not able to collect revenue as projected. This is due to shortage in enrollment out of competition with the private universities. As a House, we need to rethink the policy on university placement. These are some of the reasons that we have to revise the budget in the meantime as supplementary appropriations. Honorable Speaker, the debt issue, which we have just processed, of course, is a threat to this country, and is something that we need to have a discourse on as a country. The fiscal deficit is increasing our borrowing appetite, of course, Honorable Speaker. This proposed expenditure of Kenya shilling 3.3 trillion have 26% of it going to consolidated fund services, which mostly consist of interest payment. Given that the rising cost of dollar, the interest payment will continue to strain our economy. Honorable Speaker, let me just say something on the critical budget expenditure in this budget. The education sector, Honorable Speaker, is continuing to draw the largest proportion of the budget, which is taking 25 or 26%. This is commendable since it is one of the most sectors that will stimulate the growth of our economy by way of fighting ignorance and poverty. The additional allocation to the education sector is also enhancing the CBC preparedness, recruitment of additional teachers, construction of additional classrooms, and related infrastructure. Honorable Speaker, in this budget, we have also provided funds for IBC, Honorable Speaker. We know we have an election on the 9th of August, but we need budgetary support. They have been complaining in the past, and I'm happy, Honorable Speaker, that we have been able to sufficiently fund IBC so that they are ready for the next general election. Honorable Speaker, may I also draw the attention of this House to an amendment to the Committee of the Whole House, which are related to catering for petroleum price stabilization, that will cushion our citizens from the effects of the rising fuel. And in this regard, Honorable Speaker, there is an additional 15.36 billion shillings that has been proposed. This will enhance through the petroleum development levy. But, Honorable Speaker, I also want to hasten and say that these interventions are short-term. We cannot continue subsidizing the fuel prices. There has to be an exit strategy on how we are going to deal with this issue of petroleum. Honorable Speaker, with that, Honorable Speaker, I beg to move and request Honorable Wangwe, the majority whip, to second. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Wangwe. No, it's a majority whip.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I rise to second the appropriation bill 2022-23 as well discussed by the chair. And Honorable Speaker, what I just wish to highlight in the appropriation bill that we have before us, Honorable Speaker, is this a bill that is concluding the budget cycle for the 2022-23, and with which, Honorable Speaker, would wish to see that the budget cycle is complete on time, as we are scheduled to go for our Sinadia recess from Thursday, God willing, unless the House decides otherwise. Honorable Speaker, what comes out of the budget of 2022-23 is that most of the sectors have been addressed in this budget. Especially, Honorable Speaker, what I'm proud of is the issue of allocation of the 25.2% that has gone to the education sector, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, if you want Kenya to move forward, you must give knowledge to your citizens. And Honorable Speaker, I want to appreciate the current government, the President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, that he has thought it wise that, Honorable Speaker, he pushes the 25.2% of the budget that we have, which has to go to infrastructure in schools, employment of teachers, Honorable Speaker, as well as, Honorable Speaker, looking at the welfare of the Kenyan child through the capitation system that he has laid, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I also want to appreciate the issue that he has tried to allocate resources in agriculture. although not sufficient, Honorable Speaker, agriculture grows as a result of of subsidies, Honorable Speaker. And I want to appreciate that the consideration of a small amount that is in the budget, which has gone into the fertilizer subsidy, Honorable Speaker, is a good figure that I would want to appreciate. And in overall, Honorable Speaker, I want to thank the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury for, Honorable Speaker, living within the confines, Honorable Speaker, of the BPS in the earlier statement that he gave to this House, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I wish to thank all my colleagues also for taking their time, especially the Budget Committee, which has taken time, Honorable Speaker, over the weekend, while most of us were at home, or rather in our various constituencies, looking after, Honorable Speaker, the issues to do with our campaigns, which is ongoing. But they took their time to be in Nairobi and consider this report so that we are able, Honorable Speaker, to discuss it now and vote on it, which I beg that my colleagues appreciate, and vote on it positively so that we can complete this cycle and allow the next government, which is going to come, to take its position. Notwithstanding, Honorable Speaker, the very many issues to do with health care, all parties which are promising the issue of health care, the figures have been captured, Honorable Speaker, to support the health sector in this budget of 2022-23, Honorable Speaker. I just want to thank you, and I beg to second.
I propose a question, which is that the Appropriations Bill, National Assembly Bill number 31 of 2022, be now read a second time. Honorable Kajwang? Honorable Kajwang, I'm just going by the request.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I intended to speak on the variation of the public debt, but now that you have asked me to put my voice, I think I should, this will be my signature signing off my term and waiting if God